Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big question, one that's, right at the heart of everything. What shapes our human nature?
It's fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we know you listeners want to get to the core of these complex topics fast, find those aha moments. So today, drawing from Dr. Hasan's PhD thesis, we're diving into exactly that, what makes us tick.
Yeah, and Dr. Hasan's work is incredibly broad. It looks at historical views like Jung or Fukuyama and brings it right up to today. How technology empowers individuals, forcing us to rethink, well, everything. Human potential, our significance.
It gets really interesting, too, because the thesis connects this huge idea of human nature to something very practical, leadership and how we organize ourselves.
Right. It digs into the links between understanding us as humans and theories of leadership management, mentioning key figures like McGregor, Weick, Schermerhorn.
So what's the mission here? What's the goal of this deep dive, according to the thesis?
Well, it's not really about pinning down one definition of human nature, or even leadership for that matter. It's more about exploring. Could there be common ground? Some underlying connections between these two massive concepts.
Okay, so setting expectations. Based on the thesis's groundwork, we're not getting lost in super specific philosophical weeds like, say, the nitty-gritty of free will versus determinism in decision-making.
Exactly. And we're not trying to sort of anatomize human nature, pick it apart into separate bits, like reason over here, emotion over there.
And it's not a historical timeline piece either, like how the idea evolved century by century.
No, the goal isn't to champion one particular view. It's really about finding potential intersections, seeing where these ideas might meet.
Got it. So where does this exploration actually begin in the thesis? What's the starting point?
It starts by looking at how our whole understanding of knowledge has shifted, because those shifts really pave the way for how we think about human nature itself. It kicks off with, the traditional scientific ethos, empiricism, logical positivism, that whole approach.
The idea that you verify things through analysis, synthesis, detached observation, striving for value neutrality.
Precisely. There was this real confidence that science could give us accurate, certain answers, like the truth.
That classic image of the objective scientist. But that didn't hold forever, did it?
No, not at all. Thinkers like Popper and especially Kuhn really started questioning that. Kuhn's big idea was paradigm shifts.
Right, the idea that science doesn't just inch forward. Sometimes it takes these massive leaps, changing the whole framework.
Exactly. And Kuhn pointed out that maybe non-scientific factors, researchers' own interests, values, the historical context, actually influence how science progresses. It wasn't this purely detached activity anymore.
So science itself seen as a human activity. What did that do for understanding human nature?
Well, if even the hard sciences weren't totally objective, it kind of created space, right? Space for other frameworks to conceptualize something as complex and, frankly, messy as human nature.
Makes sense. And then someone like Feyerabend took it even further.
Oh, yeah. Feyerabend was much more radical. He questioned the primacy of reason within science itself, famously argued for a kind of methodological pluralism. His line was, anything goes.
Anything goes. Wow. That sounds chaotic for science.
Well, his point was partly that the standards we use to judge scientific ideas aren't set in stone, they're historically conditioned. He suggested scientific ideas are, in a way, just one type of belief system, not inherently superior.
Okay, that's a pretty fundamental challenge. How did researchers deal with that uncertainty? Did new methods emerge?
They did. The thesis points to this interesting approach called bricolage. Think of a bricoleur, like a handy person using whatever tools are at hand.
Okay.
In research, it means drawing on diverse interpretive methods, maybe interviews, historical analysis, personal reflection, and kind of weaving them together to get understanding. The researcher becomes more of a resourceful synthesizer.
So less about sticking to one rigid method, more about creatively combining different viewpoints, like Denson and Lincoln talked about.
Exactly, drawing inspiration from Levi Strauss, too. And this shift also brought much more attention to the social context.
How so?
The thesis emphasizes how our interactions, the institutions we live in, those publicly available systems of understanding Fish talked about, and our broader culture, the belief systems, values, norms Greets described, all of that deeply shapes meaning, including our understanding of human nature.
Right. We don't exist in a vacuum. We're shaped by these shared meanings.
Precisely. But the thesis notes, this focus on socially constructed meaning also led some thinkers down a different path towards phenomenology.
Trying to get back to direct experience. before all the interpretation.
Yes, exactly. People like Marcel worried these constructed meanings could be restrictive, could even mask power dynamics. They urged a return to the things themselves, to raw lived experience.
So there's a tension there between meaning being socially built versus trying to access something more fundamental.
The key tension, definitely. And then you have pragmatism Dewey, James focusing on practical outcomes. What works? What are the consequences of our ideas in the real world?
Focused on action and results.
And intersubjectivity, our shared understanding. Mead, for instance, argued our very sense of self or personhood rises from social forces, from taking on the attitudes and institutions of our community.
So for Mead, who I am is deeply tied to my social world.
That's the core idea. Now, moving into the second part, the thesis really starts applying these different lenses directly to human nature, and it highlights hermeneutic interpretivism as a really crucial step.
Hermeneutics. That's about interpretation, often texts, right? Like religious texts.
It started there,
Yeah.
interpreting scriptures like the Bible or the Quran, but the principles broadened out. It's about understanding meaning in texts, but also in actions, events, cultural phenomena, reading them deeply.
Okay, so what are the key aspects of this hermeneutic approach that the thesis brings out?
Several things. 1, focusing on the text's meaning and the author's intent. 2, using practical judgment, common sense. 3, recognizing meaning is shared within history and culture. 4, this interesting idea that an author's meaning might even go beyond what they consciously knew.
Huh. Like uncovering deeper layers.
Sort of.
Yeah.
And finally, that back and forth movement, understanding parts in light of the whole, and the whole through the parts. The hermeneutic circle.
Got it. And it wasn't just for religious texts, you said?
No. Thinkers like Asist and Schleiermacher expanded it. Schleiermacher emphasized empathy, trying to understand the author's mindset, their language, in its original context. Almost like listening intently to someone speak.
Trying to step into their shoes. Essentially.
Exactly. Then Dilthey pushed it further. He saw philosophy as the science of the real and stressed the historical nature of human existence. Big distinction. Explanation for natural science, understanding for human affairs.
So context is king. To understand someone, understand their time and place.
Crucial, yeah. He emphasized culture, social systems, moving beyond just individual psychology. Then the thesis brings in Freire.
Freire education, liberation theology. What's his angle on human nature?
He stressed the unity of humans and their world, rejected that strict subject-object split. We're not just observers, we're participants in a reality that's also changing. Knowing involves both our consciousness and the concrete historical world.
And his concept of praxis fits in here.
Absolutely central. Praxis, reflection, and action intertwined. You understand the world by trying to change it, and vice versa.
Okay. Now, the thesis also mentions the more, let's say, traditional philosophical view.
Right. Briefly touches on it. The idea of distinct components like body and soul or body and psyche, Plato, Descartes, that long tradition of seeing mind and matter as fundamentally different.
A very enduring idea in the West. So after mapping out all these different approaches, scientific, interpretive, pragmatic, philosophical, what's the verdict in the thesis? Can we actually pin down human nature?
Well, the thesis points out what a lot of scholarship finds. It's really, really difficult, maybe impossible to get one single conclusive answer.
No surprise there, I guess.
It highlights the sheer range of views, Darwin's evolutionary perspective, Marx focusing on social relations, postmodern humanism. Then you have more deterministic ideas, even concepts like Marcuse's instinct for negativity or Dawkins' cultural viruses.
Wow, quite a spectrum. From biological drives to social constructs to cultural viruses.
Okay.
So part 3 then shifts focus specifically to Islamic perspectives.
Yes, this is a major section. It introduces the Quranic view. Humankind cast in a perfect mold, innately able to recognize good and evil, given freedom, creativity.
A very positive starting point.
The goal is guidance towards harmony with nature, with supreme goodness. But it acknowledges our desires need directing towards the common good. Disciplined desires lead to happiness and harmony.
And freedom is key too.
Yes, the thesis stresses the Quranic emphasis on the right to self-determination in this life. We have potential, but also responsibility for our choices.
Interesting. How does this perspective view ethics compared to modern ideas?
It contrasts the modern focus on abstract rules and logic with earlier views of ethics as transformational, almost therapeutic. The thesis suggests modern law has often replaced this inner cultivation of virtue.
A shift from inner character to external compliance.
That's the idea presented. It also explores the concept of a natural morality arising from inner harmony, distinct from just social convention. mentions Hobbes, the limitations of the golden rule.
And compassion, empathy.
Yes, highlights the natural inclination towards compassion. Hutcheson, Hume, Smith, Rousseau, even Wilson as key to moral psychology.
Seems like a recurring theme across different traditions.
Definitely. The thesis also discusses the sort of circularity in ethical knowledge. Intellect and character depend on each other. Cites Aristotle. Ethics isn't mathematically precise, and virtue comes partly from nature, not just discourse.
So you can't just think your way to being good. It's about who you are, developing character.
That's the gist. It raises concerns about purely scientific ethics potentially being elitist versus a more democratic view that requires cultivating the whole person, as McIntyre and Aristotle argued.
Right. What about sociobiology's take, as presented in the thesis?
Sociobiology tries to understand the biological basis, the genetic constraints, on human social behavior. It provides a framework, but the thesis notes that nature imposes limits, and so does the social context. It's not purely one or the other.
A balance between biology and environment.
Seems to be. Then there's the broader naturalistic tradition, humans as purely natural beings, behavior driven by DNA, natural selection. Wiener's work is mentioned, though philosophers try to integrate this with other ideas for a fuller picture.
Trying to bridge that science-philosophy gap again.
Exactly, clarifying things like the unconscious, its relation to freedom, and then Jung comes in.
Jung's psychology of the spirit, archetypes, individuation.
Yes. Seeing the psyche as somewhat independent of matter, emphasizing the spiritual dimension, the interplay of conscious and unconscious. Absar's work is noted here too.
Adding another layer of depth. How does the thesis position the Islamic perspective amidst all this?
As a distinct contribution, kind of bridging transcendentalism, ideas beyond experience, and empiricism, knowledge from senses, using Wilson's framing.
Okay.
It contrasts the naturalist empiricist view ethics from consensus, guided by innate rules, religion as myth, with transcendentalist views where moral guidelines come from outside the human mind, like natural law or Kantian free will.
Two fundamentally different sources for morality.
Yeah. The thesis then discusses religion's primary role, citing Schuon as discerning the real from unreal, establishing union with God. Concepts like the ultimate ego and differentiating the absolute versus concentrating on the real.
A deeply spiritual framing.
Very much so. Then it introduces Tawhid, the core Islamic concept of a oneness of God. This implies life is undivided, no sharp split between material and spiritual,
Holism.
and Quranic naturalism via Iqal. Our relationship with nature is key. We use it, but also see it as a sign of God for spiritual growth. The universe is a continuous creative flow.
Nature is good and serving a purpose.
Yes, inherently good and subservient to humankind, Tuskir. Humans are God's vice-regents, Khalifa, meant to realize moral values on earth, equipped with reason, language, etc.
A position of responsibility.
In this world, seen as a seedbed for the hereafter, the Prophet's advice, live like a stranger, a passerby.
A temporary journey with an ultimate destination. Then there's Shah Waliullah's Sufi metaphysics.
Right, the macrocosm, universe, and microcosm, human. The nafs al-kuliya, or universal self. Concepts of ibda, origination, and khalq, creation. Complex, interconnected ideas.
Okay, so if you had to summarize the key points of the Quranic perspective on human nature from the thesis.
It lays out several. Special creation with purpose, inherent openness and flexibility, many behavioral possibilities, complexity from soul-mind interaction, universal presence despite diversity. Nature as our context. Accessing nature requires self-control and accountability. Potential to fulfill our role. Individual discretion within broad scope. Need for overall coherence.
That's got quite a comprehensive view. What about the spirit? How does that fit in?
The Quran describes spirit as God's word or command, ainshikal. It's person-specific, a sign of our vicegerency. It comes from God, is the basis of human superiority, and returns to God. It's permanent. Matter is subordinate to it.
The enduring essence. And the heart, the qalb, not just the physical organ.
No, in Islamic psychology, the qalb is central, the prime originator of behavior, motivation, insight, perception. It comprehends God's message, directs actions.
More than just emotion.
Much more. Ghazali described 5 phases or levels of its faculty, illuminating reality, ultimately perceiving the transcendental. The Quran calls it a supersensory organ for cognizing metaphysical truths, tafakkul, involving both intellect and emotion.
Fascinating. What about the mind? Where does that fit?
The mind's role in reason, logic, especially in leadership, is acknowledged, but within the bounds of rationality, as we might say. Communication is key, reflecting autonomy, responsibility. Mind expresses itself via language, culture, behavior. It's where spirit and soul seem to converge.
An intersection point, and the inner-outer connection.
Islam stresses unity and balance between internal soul, mind, and external body. Disharmony is problematic.
Okay. The thesis also mentions different aspects or states of the soul, nafs.
Yes, the commanding soul, nafs al-amara, urging towards base desires, potentially hindering cognition. Then the reproaching soul, nafs al-amara, our conscience, the source of self-reproach or guilt.
That inner critic.
And the tranquil soul, nafs al-mutmainah, a state of contentment, harmony, achieved through closeness to the divine in Sufi thought.
States of being, and the soul's defining feature.
Self-motion, its inherent activity. Plato and Aristotle also noted this distinguishing life from matter. The thesis emphasizes that finding purpose and our place is crucial for an integrated self, avoiding inner conflict.
Purpose again, leading into the fourth part, health, virtue, harmony. How does the thesis define health here?
As an indicator of life, harmony between person and nature. It's relative, but has some absolute characteristics. Explained via the body's functions, influenced by religion, culture, social ideology. Physical health has natural value, partly given, partly acquired.
Nature and nurture again.
Right. And the interplay with the environment is key, especially during changes. The thesis briefly touches on different biological views, adaptation, behaviorism, teleology.
And social influence.
Huge. Social milieu shapes health norms, what's considered adaptive. It notes the historical shift, the body becoming less sacred, more a public object for science, contrasting this with religious views.
A different way of seeing ourselves physically.
And the distinction between physical and psychic self.
Yeah.
In Islam, the heart, qawb, represents that inner self. Behavior is categorized. Reproduction, self-maintenance, life enhancement, speech, and sociality are vital here.
Okay. The thesis critiques social science's non-judgmental stance sometimes.
Yeah, points out the difficulty in finding objective grounds for value judgments. It also notes the potential negative psychic effects of progress and the resulting search for therapies.
Progress isn't always progress for the psyche.
Seems that way sometimes. Different models of psychic health are discussed: negative, absence of symptoms; positive, fulfillment; mechanical, analytical, humanistic models in psychology, all trying to grasp human nature.
Lots of attempts. What about natural law ethics making a comeback?
Yes, linking ethics back to the biological foundations of behavior. This influences debates on, say, earth control, suicide. The naturalist view suggests judgment should consider health values, common moral sentiments, not just rigid rules or absolute personal choice.
A more pragmatic, health-focused ethical view.
And reason is key, again, managing passions, pleasures, wealth for overall health. Al-Razi, Ibn Miskawayh, emphasized the soul-body interdependence.
Mind influencing body.
Definitely. Ibn Sina, Ghazali, discussed how emotions will affect physical health. Islamic rituals and doctrines are seen as promoting health by reinforcing faith, providing certainty, solace. Faith itself has therapeutic value.
That connection between belief and well-being.
And that Quranic link. Forgetting God is forgetting oneself. Remembering God is remembering oneself. Frankel apparently endorsed this. Balance is crucial, avoiding extremes. Islam stands for peace, submission to God's will, that's seen as the key to psychic health, aligning choice and faith.
Controlling impulses is part of that.
Yes, controlling the tongue, sexual desires are mentioned specifically.
The historical link between health and virtue comes up again.
Right. Illness and vice were once linked. Modernity largely separated morality and medicine, though there's a recent resurgence of interest in spiritualizing health.
The interesting cycle. And virtue itself.
Contrasted again. Modern ethics as rule-following versus the Greek view of virtue as excellence, living up to human potential. Modern philosophy often de-emphasized virtue. The thesis suggests harmony comes from uniting spontaneity and goodness, supported by diverse fields like Darwinism, Freudian ideas, philosophy, common sense.
So being good should feel natural in a harmonious state.
That's the implication. Applying ethical rules requires sensitivity to the specific case. Moral reasoning isn't just intellect. It involves shaping pleasures and behaviors virtuously. Aristotle's mean is relevant.
Finding that balance. What about vice?
Its pain-relieving quality is seen as distorting the self. Freud's concept of resistance, self-condemnation, fits here. Ghazali categorized virtues functionally. Spiritual diseases like malevolence, avarice have causes and cures in Islamic teachings.
A framework for inner health. How did things change after the Enlightenment?
Rise of scientific tradition led to conflicts, especially post-Freud. Sexual freedom, abortion. Scientific reductionism shifted focus away from moral conceptions, leading towards relativism or nihilism. Motivation is briefly framed as cognition plus effect.
Science changing the conversation about values. Pleasure is defined how?
As positive inner feelings motivating behavior. But distinguishing terms like emotions, instincts is hard. Naturalism sees pleasures mainly driving survival or reproduction. There's no agreed way to rank pleasures qualitatively.
And the pleasure of pain relief.
Can override simpler pleasures, leading to self-distortion, Freud's neurosis, the ego fighting itself.
Paradox there. What about Parwaz's view on human nature?
He argues human nature, as commonly understood, doesn't really exist. Behavior follows inherent properties. This contrasts with Shah Waliullah's idea of unchangeable faculties.
Shawwalio's typology.
Yes, based on hadith, humans have inferior, animalistic, and superior angelic aptitudes. The ratio determines individual faculties. There's tanazus, contest between them, and istila, balanced compromise.
Inner conflict and resolution. How does this compare to Western thinkers?
Contrast with Machiavelli, Hobbes' experience shapes us towards aggression, selfishness. Darwin's struggle, Spencer favoring the strong. Adam Smith's self-interest, sometimes seen as selfish. Freud's innate instincts versus society, creating guilt.
A lot of focus on conflict and self-interest there.
Evidence suggests humans have been aggressive, wanting dominance. These different views influenced organizational theories from close control to cooperation.
How we manage reflects how we see people.
Absolutely. Then there's the view of potential shaped by relationships, culture, Rousseau, Sullivan. Ultimately, human nature seems a mix of opposites on a continuum. We're adaptable.
That doubleness and adaptability.
Traditional philosophy valued harmony, even while admitting we can negate our fixed nature. Think Aristotle, Ghazali, Shah Waliullah, linked to self-transcendence, the temptation to be godlike. Modernity's obsession with plurality fits here too.
What about conscience? Sincerity, self-deception.
Conscience links to self-knowledge, restraint. Self-deception imprisons it. Different from the Freudian superego, traditional conscience has moral content.
Tricking ourselves.
We tend to reject simple pleasures for competition. Status may be an evolutionary thing. But the harmonious self isn't destroyed by the neurotic one, just hidden or distorted. Naturalism might say overcoming self-negation is our nature, leading to a higher synthesis, like Hegel.
Emerging from the conflict, Freud was more pessimistic.
Saw societal life as an imposed, maybe insoluble compromise between desire and control.
So, no single theory of development.
No universal standard. Practices vary by goals. Islam offers a transcendental concept, holistic psychotherapy. Traditional doctrines are continually reformulated.
And Taba, repentance.
Opens the door for reconciliation with the world, with God, a path to self-development driven by the reproaching and tranquil soul. Similar dynamics to catharsis, but with more responsibility, cosmic healing.
A path back to wholeness. Okay, well, we have certainly covered an immense amount of territory today, all stemming from Dr. Hasan's thesis summary.
It's vast, isn't it? Shows just how complex and contested this question of human nature really is. So many perspectives, often conflicting.
Definitely. But as the thesis suggests, the very act of asking, of arguing philosophically, points to something fundamentally human that drive to seek truth, even if a single answer remains elusive.
That's a great point. And the thesis brings up the Islamic holy tradition, described by Martin Lings, as a potential synthesis, where the perfected human achieves vice-regency, a direct link to the divine, uniting leadership and human nature in a way.
A powerful unifying idea, and that guiding principle offered.
Do for this world as if you were to live 1,000 years, and for the next as if you were to die tomorrow. It's a very practical way to think about harnessing our potential, balancing worldly action and ultimate purpose.
Yeah, that resonates. And Havel's point about awareness and consciousness driving history, echoing the Quran, it speaks to the leader's potential, doesn't it? To illuminate, guide towards a better life.
It does. And connecting back to Warner, a happy life involves exercising free action and Aristotle virtuous actions being inherently pleasant. It all suggests that understanding human nature in all its complexity, as we've touched on, is actually vital for that kind of free, fulfilling action.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on. Considering this incredible diversity of perspectives we've explored today, what single aspect of human nature do you think holds the most significant key, both for individual fulfillment and for effective leadership? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.